Hi everyone, and welcome to the EV Owners Lounge. Today we're joined by some very special guests, and as always, I'd like to introduce you to Mark and Sham from Mobileray EV. And we're also joined by Murad, who is an insurance underwriter, coming in with all the expertise about electric cars and how they relate to insurance and insuring your electric car. We want this session to be as interactive as possible, so feel free to drop your comments and questions in the box, and we'll do our best to answer them during the session. And yeah, feel free to let us know as well your questions to do with the topic of electric cars. So with that said, let's start with Murad. Feel free to introduce yourself and what you do.
Hi guys, pleasure to be here with you guys. So I'm an underwriter within personal lines motor insurance, so I deal with personal customers that are bread and butter as opposed to sort of like the fleet schemes, commercial schemes that are dealt with by big lease companies, salary sacrifice type stuff, which you've discussed previously. So it's more the personal consumer market that I work in. I do specialise in the EV side of things where I am, and also with autonomous vehicles, which I know is a subject that you wanted to potentially touch on today. And I've been doing this for nearly 5 years and thoroughly enjoying it, and all the advances in technology that we get, and particularly how these things can hopefully save me money. That's something that everybody's keen on. So saving money and EVs is my thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we Murad, we were at the British Motor Show and then EV Live, and in both cases it's not just an EV audience, right? It's a general public and petrol heads, and we met actually a lot of families because we had some kids giveaways where they had one EV and one petrol diesel car, right? But a lot of the topics that came up, which is why I wanted to talk to you this week, is that EV insurance is so high. It's higher than for diesel or combustion engine cars. And I was just wondering if because I've heard a lot of different reasons as to why that is, but I was wondering if you had as an underwriter insurance, what are the reasons why they are higher than combustion engines?
Yeah, so there's a few different reasons, some of which you've sort of addressed in your previous streams, actually. But for the most part, the way that we approach things is going to be fairly similar between the two types of vehicles, both ICE and EV. The main differences actually are going to be things like the design structure of the vehicles that can potentially cause additional issues, which increase the repair costs. And then the different driving profiles of the vehicles. As you mentioned, you put your foot down and you're off. That is a really big risk factor for EVs compared to ICE. When you think about the sort of performance you get out of a traditional ICE vehicle, you're talking something that's very expensive. It's going to be limited amount of people that can have that. You get that in a cheap EV. Right, you're going to have that performance out of a £40,000 EV as opposed to a 80, 90, £100,000 ICE, and people aren't used to that sort of performance when they first get them. And one of the biggest things that we deal with in terms of claims as insurers across the board is the majority of them are low speed incidents. So you're talking about things like accidental acceleration, bumps in car parks. And when you have a vehicle that can do 0 to 30 quicker than anything else, it makes that damage so much more.
If the manufacturers throttled that acceleration, it would actually be less of an insurance risk, is what you're saying?
Yeah, potentially. But then that's kind of what people want out of the cars, right? We all want a little bit of excitement out of driving. Everybody wants a little bit of a feeling from the car. That's the main thing. You see all the petrol heads going, they're just dull, they're boring. Say that when you get pinned into the back of your seat in an inappropriate situation that you get from. So there are those sorts of things, and then it's the design of the cars themselves as to how easily they can be repaired. the structure of the cars, and it goes down to the repair methods for the vehicles. When you have a vehicle that has a massive tray of batteries in the floor pan, that's a huge proportion of the vehicle value. And if the methods dictate that there's scratches or dents in that, an otherwise repairable vehicle may have to be a total loss because the manufacturer says that, this amount of damage on the battery case means it has to be replaced. You've got other manufacturers that are much better at that. Nissan and Renault, their batteries can be completely individually repaired. You can remove the outer tray, keep everything on the inside, a much cheaper option. You can replace individual cells if they're damaged, much cheaper option. And things like protective plates so that battery casing isn't directly exposed to the ground. A lot of people don't realise that battery tray on the vast majority of cars is directly exposed to the ground. So
really?
if that... Oh. Can you still hear me?
Yeah,
I can still hear you. Yeah.
No, go on again.
You're having a few camera issues there, but no worries, we can still hear you.
Okay, well, as long as you can hear me, that's the main thing, I suppose. So having protective trays is something that's really good. So with manufacturers putting those onto different models, like the new i5 has a protective tray underneath. So if there's stuff that comes up and catches it, you can just swap that out instead. All of these kinds of basic design elements help towards reducing the insurance cost because they become more and more repairable.
Can I ask a question, Murad? In terms of EV, these electric vehicles tend to have a very high end of software design element associated to the performance running of the car. Is the insurance going to cover faults and issues related to software claims, if that's the right word to use it? Because at the moment it may have not happened, in the future they may. Is there something that the industry is working towards? Because I think that's going to be an issue at some point, potentially, or if not, a very few amount of those issues could be raised as a claim. Or is it just design and mechanical related claims at the moment that you're processing?
That's a really good question. And, certainly certain manufacturers, the likes of Tesla, have caused more questions in that realm. The vehicles these days are less and less cars and more pieces of technology, right? So the bread and butter of all insurance policies it's the physical unit. We would, at the moment, the vast majority of insurers would be saying that it's not something that we cover. We don't cover software issues. That's going to be a manufacturer warranty kind of issue for them to maintain that. With the level of connectivity that they have, it's easier for the vehicle manufacturers to be able to do that, because if something goes wrong, they can push another update, right?
But it's interesting, Murad, because I've heard a number of incidents, especially when you're talking about unsupported vehicles like Ocean Fisker, for example, right, or Fisker Ocean, where people are they're locked out of their cars, or they're locked in their cars because the software's failed, right? And it actually requires a physical intervention and cost, which potentially is then not covered by insurance. Is that or it would be covered by insurance?
So I guess with it's easier to imagine being locked out of the car, right? So if you're locked out of the car, it wouldn't necessarily be an insurance thing, but it might be a breakdown provider thing.
Okay.
Similar to like if you'd lost your keys or something like that, just to be able to get you physical access to the car. But insurance is there to protect against damage, like actual damage. And if the software is broken, it's not functioning, but is that really damaged? That's an interesting question. And it's not something that's really been, thankfully, touch wood at the minute, borne out for us to have to really test in the industry on that point.
I mean, look, we work in the software industry, right? At least Sham and I do, and it's very rare that you get insurance for software. Right? It's one of those things that unfortunately does not carry an insurance with it. I wanted to ask you something about, because I've heard a number of different explanations of why EV insurance is high. There's not enough, qualified EV repair places. The parts are not as easily obtained, even though there's obviously less parts on an EV, and other reasons like that, and that there are certain makes that are more expensive because the parts are not as easily available versus other. Can you just, from your perspective as an insurance underwriter, what do you see?
Oh yeah, absolutely. On that first point, addressing the talent gap is a huge concern across the industry. We're really lucky in the UK. We have got an absolutely massive aftermarket repair network. It's huge, and that goes for the ones that the insurers use, the ones that your main dealers use. Even your local only kind of shops. And the lack of HV trained and certified technicians is an issue, and the whole industry needs to do more to get that talent in, fresh talent, get the youngsters in there on the apprenticeships, but also upskilling and cross training all of the existing talent, so that there are people available. I've heard people say, in local dealers and stuff, like, I need to get a car serviced. They can't put me in for 2 months because they've got that many EVs already in line, but I could get my petrol in tomorrow. That's a huge issue, and that goes into the repair network as well, because if you haven't got the number of people there, you can't process and repair things quickly, which you then add on stuff like parts availability. That adds more delays. And again, sort of one of the other things with EVs, which is a challenge, is whilst they're really, really safe and the chances of them catching fire are significantly smaller than an ICE vehicle, when they do, they really do. So any vehicle that's at potential risk of fire, and in particular thermal runaway, they have to be quarantined, which means you've got an exclusion zone around the vehicle so it can't set anything else out on fire. So whereas in a repair centre, you could have a car park completely filled with vehicles waiting. If you've got an EV there, you've probably got to have, the spaces all around it free, so you can't fit as many vehicles in waiting or getting the first bit of work done and that kind of thing. So the exclusion zones around them for the safety of those technicians is something else that also has an impact. So yeah, all of these things.
Is that a real thing?
The quarantine, yes.
Oh, really? Because because I guess they have a lower probability of catching fire, but if there's an accident, it could catch fire, so the probability goes up, and then the way of putting out the fire is obviously different because it's a battery, not diesel or petrol, right? And because I had a comment from somebody a while ago that said ferries don't let EVs go onto the ferries, and I actually did some research, and pretty much all the ferries allow EVs to go on the ferries now because they've installed specific fire fighting equipment that is specific for putting out BEVs, right, battery vehicles. Except for one, ironically, Norway ferry company, which still bans them, which is ironic because Norway's got the highest EV percentage by a long way. So isn't it just a matter of having the right EV firefighting equipment? So
that's part of it, but some of the main things that we've got in terms of the technologies to combat it is there's a couple of fire brigades, in the country and across the world that have these essentially really, really big blankets. They're really, really heavy, and they sort of just wrap it over the car, and you have to then just wait. Right. The problem with EV fires is they're self-sustaining. Once they go and that thermal runaway catches, it doesn't need any external source to keep going. It creates everything it needs to sustain the fire within itself. So under that blanket, it's still burning. It's just not spreading. right? And you essentially, with all of these, have to wait them out. I think it was in Germany, they've got a big mobile container on the back of a lorry, so that if there's an accident on the roads and the networks, they basically put this on the road, lift up the burning car, dump it in the massive tank of water, and again, just wait. Underwater, no oxygen getting to it, still continues going. These are all things that the repair network and body shops can't have themselves. So that's why they have the exclusion zones, because it doesn't take a lot for that fire to jump to the next car.
It's interesting. When we were at the British Motor Show, I was talking to the BYD guy, and he was very proudly telling me that their new battery doesn't go on thermal runaway, as you call it, when it gets penetrated. And he actually showed me a video. He told me to go to their stand and look at a video where the BYD battery literally is ran through, and you see the spikes in the graphs that they're measured, but no reaction, no thermal reaction, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder, and he proudly told me that, Tesla is thinking about switching to these batteries, and BYD, maybe a new name to this market, but they've been doing batteries for a long time, 20 plus years, right? Yeah. And I was wondering if future technology, not necessarily changing the lithium-ion batteries, but to solid state or other types of battery, but actually the existing battery structure will start negating some of that thermal runaway potentially.
Yeah, I guess it could be. There are a couple of different types, and like you say, it's different chemistries are more prone to it than others. The lithium ions are the worst, but the unfortunate thing is they also give the best range, right? They're the most energy dense. You look at like the LFP batteries, really cheap, really stable, but no range because they haven't got the energy density. So it's finding all of these different things and the different makeups of the cell structures. So absolutely, as that evolves and more of them get there, the problem is that there's so many different types, and the manufacturers are trying to find those right price points, I guess. So they're using a mixing.
Murad, just a question from an insurance perspective. Are there certain design principles that certain manufacturers that are known to you that are safer to use, even if it's lithium ion? I'm just trying to understand, is there a perception in the insurance industry, okay, this type of specification, this lithium ion or whatever it may be has a much higher safety rating, hence the insurance would be less? Or is it a blanket approach that if it's lithium ion and it's electric, it's a premium upload of 20%? I'm just making this up at the moment, the percentage, but you understand my point.
Yeah, no. So the chemistry makeup of the batteries and the actual structure isn't easily obtainable. It's something that we would love because it would help with that risk assessment of the vehicles and add an additional layer to the calculations and understanding of the risk. But essentially, it's kind of just a flat having to take a view in general of these because they are far less likely to catch fire, right? It's just the problem of when it does, it's really bad.
Yeah.
So, that shouldn't ever be a concern for people. I'd be far more concerned in a petrol car of being involved in an accident and it catching fire than I would in an EV. The structure of the cars, the way that they build their chassis, they're designed to protect those units, right? So it would take a lot. And like Mark said, with the Pearson test, that's the standard kind of test to see how likely a battery will be to catch fire.
Yeah.
But there's also crushing and things like that. But in general, the actual cell of the vehicle itself and the battery tray are going to be very secure for the vast majority of instances. So that shouldn't really be a concern. And whilst it is considered and taken into account in the models, it's not, that fire risk is not a big part of it as such.
I'm sure, like the normal petrol engines, they have a crumple zone, the whole chassis. But in terms of electric, if it's more cocoon and safer, it must be quite I don't want to be graphical, but might be more difficult for the fire and rescue people to cut through the chassis to get to inside the vehicle if for any reason, if they need to. I presume, I'm just making a presumption here. But the question I want to sort of lead into, so just moving off this topic, is that with electric vehicles, there's a lot of telemetry and data that you can pull out, and a lot of third-party companies that are coming out to provide services to third-party integration with these cars. Is the insurance industry going to work towards integrating with these to get much better usage data so that they can lower the premium or increase the premium depending on the risk exposure in the future?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because there are pros and cons from both a consumer and insurer perspective to that kind of pay-as-you-use type policy. And the data aspect is also a concern. So Ford were having a deal with, I can't remember the name of the insurer now, but they had a deal where they would be able to get direct API access to the telemetry from the vehicle to essentially be able to do that and, more accurately price for the risk of the specific driver based on the mileage and driving patterns. I don't think that's gone particularly well when customers were told that the insurer would be getting their data. There's lots of telematics policies out there. They're normally targeted at the generally higher risk type people, like the youngsters, because it can help reduce. But again, depending on how those work, there's an element of people do what people do, and that's not always necessarily going to reflect what they're telling their insurance companies, even if they've signed up to a telematics thing, right? So if I've got a thing on my phone that says that will monitor my driving, I just leave my phone at home.
Okay, makes sense. And I guess it's a bit more maturity at the moment until more and more EV adoptions happens, more and more telemetry is safe and secure and standardized, and it may become more prevalent in using that as a metric to lower or increase the premium accordingly if permitted. But the other thing I wanted to touch base right at the beginning, we talked about autonomous vehicles. Now, how is that industry? Because that's quite new to me to understand. If it's a fully autonomous vehicle or is autonomous, most of them can be. How is that covered from an insurance point of view? Is it separate or is it an added feature?
It's going to have to be a standard part of anybody who's looking to insure vehicles cover, because they're a special type of vehicle because they've got that functionality, but they're just a normal vehicle. It's same as EVs have a different type of drivetrain, but they're still just a vehicle. So the legislation has started to be deployed and gone live to allow these vehicles to start entering our markets and going on our roads. So unless you specifically just don't want to write that type of vehicle, which is absolutely fine, every insurer can choose who they want to insure. If you are going to be insuring them, it's just a standard part of the cover, And like I say, because we've got the first stage of that with Ava coming in, there's several other stages to this before we can get to that full market deployment of vehicles, but the groundwork's there.
Follow-up question from me: if there's unfortunate claim due to an autonomous feature being active, so it's autonomous, it's running, and you're sitting in the car, there's an unfortunate incident that happens. From a claim point of view, how is that envisaged? Because there's no human error as such per se from your autonomous vehicle potentially, because the reaction times are different. Is there an element of bearing of positivity? Okay, it was at the time of the incident, autonomous vehicle feature was active, and the other party may or may not have had that active. Is it considered in a positive light from a claim output point of view?
So, yeah, with the legislation, the way it currently stands is that if the vehicle is in autonomous mode, the car will be the user in charge. And because the car isn't an actual legal entity, the vehicle manufacturer is by default the user in charge. So actually, they will be liable for the costs. and you as the driver will actually become a third party in that scenario as well. So even if your car is at fault, unlike now where if you crashed into somebody and it was deemed to be your fault, you couldn't then claim personal injury. If the car does that, you could.
We're getting closer to the end, Murad, and I had we're hopefully going to announce soon. I think I did contact LV if they were interested, but they said no. We're about to announce a charger protection guarantee. We can't call it insurance, up to £3,000. So when hosts sign up on a Mobile Array EV, they will get a charger protection guarantee, which is up to, if anybody's doing the using of the host's charger and damage or things get taken, like cables, they will be covered up to £3,000. So, and we're going to announce that very shortly. It's taken a little bit longer than we expected, but I was wondering if you, what developments you see in the future for insurance, especially for electric vehicles, and what can somebody do? You know, if I wanted to insure an EV9, right, Kia EV9, which is hopefully my next car, how can I get the cheapest insurance? Is it through, you know, salary sacrifice, subscription, or go to LV Direct? What's the answer? How can I get the cheapest insurance, and where do you see insurance going?
So I guess in terms of where it's going, you're going to see more and more EV benefits going into the market. The majority of the big insurers have stuff like this, such as, you know, cover for your wall box, your chargers, that kind of thing. A big thing that we've seen actually as they changed the grant system to go towards multi occupant dwellings, so flats and the like, was a lot of those sorts of people in councils wanting confirmation of liability coverage, which is a standard part. So if you're charging your car and somebody trips over it, will that person be covered by the insurer rather than the council? That kind of thing. Out of charge recovery is probably another one, which, you know, thankfully most people shouldn't need. But that's going to become more and more prevalent across the industry, especially as it becomes one of de facto's what they call core rating benefits. In general, though, as in terms of like the insurance and trying to get the best price, you know, the most important thing with anybody is always making sure that you're given correct and accurate information. So things like fronting, you know, trying to get cheaper insurance by, you know, changing who the main user of the vehicle is or who the owner is, and, you know, not providing the right information and declarations might save you a little bit at the front, but if you get caught doing that, it can have really big, wide impacts on your future life. So, you know, always make sure it's important to give the right information, and then shop around and make sure you find cover that's right for you. The other side, like you say, is salary sacrifice. If you've got an employer that can do that, that can potentially give you a really good saving on the standard sort of cost for the vehicle as well as the insurance. And I think it was mentioned in one of your other streams as well. Other ways to do it, I take the hit on having a slightly more increased price on my insurance by having solar PV and home batteries. I get my savings through that because I can go on Octopus Intelligent Go. So, you know, I get massive savings through the year. In fact, actually this year we got paid for our electricity for 2 months, you know, because of that, through the exporting and things like that. So there are other ways to offset the cost of both the car and the insurance if you can.
Okay.
Fascinating, yeah. Thank you very much, Murad, for your insights as well. I think the interesting insights about the low speed impacts and things like that with insurance is something that we don't necessarily consider. It sounds like as well with repair shops, there's a lot of catching up to do with the industry. I think EV adoption has kind of outpaced kind of all of the other aspects that go with driving, and insurance is one of them, of course. So yeah, fascinating insights, and thanks everyone for joining today. Be sure to follow all of us on the respective pages that you're watching from. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll have another session on another topic about electric
Yeah.
vehicles.
Thanks, Murad. And anybody watching, follow Mobile Array EV, or even better, download the app and sign up.